Good morning. Before I share with you my Bible study, I wish to make an announcement that will be made over and over again. Your governing board, the session met last night, and they have acted on the request of your staff that we resume in-person worship on the first Sunday of October. A letter will be mailed to each of you, and it will be placed on the website, sharing with you the particulars of what that means. However, understand now, the first Sunday of October is no longer a soft date. We are firmly committed to opening on that Sunday. Let me share with you one thing that will be in the letter, and that is that the governing board reserves the right to shut worship down again following that date if infection rises in this community and they feel that it is warranted to do so. But know that on the first Sunday of October, we are opening our doors for in-person worship, and your staff are eager to welcome you back to this place. Many of you have been with me for the 8+ years that I've been your pastor, and if you have listened carefully to my preaching and to my teaching, you will certainly know that my favorite passage of Scripture in all of the Bible is Deuteronomy 6:21. We were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt, but God brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. That is Deuteronomy 6:21. If you're ever playing a trivia game on the history and the ministry of the First Presbyterian Church of Delray Beach, and the question is asked, what is your pastor's favorite Bible verse? Deuteronomy 6:21. We were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt, but God brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. However, to understand the power of that one verse, we need to back up one verse to verse 20. In verse 20, God is speaking to the people of Israel and says that when your children ask you, what is the meaning of the commandments and the statutes and the laws that your God has given you, then you are to correct them and answer, we were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt. Did you see the shift? Oftentimes our children will point to us and say, your faith, not my faith. Your God, not my God. Your religious practices, not my practices. And in a shift, we say, no, we belong to God, and we were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt. But then, what makes that passage so meaningful to me, and I hope this will make it meaningful to you, is that if you look at that passage, we were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt, but God brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Most people only read that historically, and it is historically correct. It is speaking to a time when the people of Israel were slaves in Egypt, and by the power of God, working through Moses, they were brought out of Egypt, led through the wilderness to a promised land. Yes, it is historical, but the deep meaning of that passage is found at a figurative level. What I want you to understand is that all of us have our Pharaohs. All of us have our Egypts. What I'm speaking about is that in every one of our lives, there's a place where we are kept hostage, captive. We're enslaved. It may be a desire, a temptation, or an unhealthy habit, but there is something out there that is larger than us, that is stronger than us, that holds us back from enjoying kind of fellowship with God that we desperately want. Those who are in a 12-step program, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Let's take alcohol for an example. There are people who find that they're enslaved to the disease of alcoholism, and by themselves, they can't do anything about it. Alcohol has become their Pharaoh and their Egypt, and they are held in bondage, and by their own strength, they can do nothing about it. But because they recognize a higher power, we as Christians acknowledge that as God revealed in the person of Jesus Christ. Because they recognize a higher power, they look to that higher power and they ask for that power, in this case God, to come into our place of Egypt, alcoholism, addiction to sex, addiction to drugs, whatever it may be, to come into that place of bondage and to overpower the Pharaoh that enslaves us. We can't overpower Pharaoh, but God can. And God comes and overpowers that Pharaoh and brings us home, sets us free to live in the fellowship of God fully as God intended. I want to add one more comment, and that is that in the journey of our life, we will tend to wander back to Egypt. Once an alcoholic, they say they're always an alcoholic. Now, some may remain sober for the rest of their lives. Others will remain sober for years, and they'll slip back into Egypt. They'll slip back into drinking. And they'll start the known process of 12 steps, Alcoholics Anonymous, all over again. What is good is that they continue to fight. They fight with God. So once we have been set free, that doesn't mean that we may not, in our own weakness, wander back to Egypt and become enslaved by Pharaoh once again. The good news of this passage is that God is a God who continues to pursue us, will always come into our place of bondage, our place of Egypt, and by God's strength will overcome the power of Pharaoh and embrace us in God's loving arms and take us back home. We were Pharaoh's slaves. God brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Thank you. I look forward to being with you this Sunday morning.